So you know what we'll do? We'll get started because the whole thing will be live at least on Instagram story for 24 hours. People can
Okay.
refer back to it. So what I hope to do is just introduce you, set sort of a stage for how the conversation came to be, and then let you at it because I can't wait to learn from you.
All right, sounds good.
So, anyone who's been following the Distance Project, we've been talking about breathing for everyday life, breathing for endurance sports, breathing for stress and anxiety mitigation for a long time. You guys have seen our content on that. And we've had a chance to connect with some brilliant educators in the breath space and the space of respiration physiology, science and medicine. It's been a real deep learning journey. And then all of a sudden, we find ourselves faced with a respiratory pandemic. And we watch the entire world stop. And we watch an opportunity for all of us, hopefully, to go deeper into our understanding of respiration and how breathing works so that we can stay safer, we can protect our communities, and we can do the groundwork now to ask, this is a novel coronavirus. There's a lot that we don't know about it. But we can then put some stock in the fact that, well, we do know something about the lungs. We do know something about the respiratory system. We do know something about air. We know something about previous viral transmission. So how can we leverage what we do know about breathing at a time when there is so much uncertainty? And how can we build a deeper understanding of how something like this can maybe even change how we approach breath education? So at the early onset stage of a respiratory pandemic, we're able to take the smartest, safest steps as soon as possible without waiting for specific research to a specific virus to come out, because it takes time. It takes time and it takes funding. So if we can get a deeper understanding of what we do know about how we breathe and why we breathe and how breathing is related to infectious disease and the immune system, hopefully we can leverage that information into a very important conversation at a very important time. So you and I followed Jessica's work for quite a while, and I've always loved what you've done. Recently, a YouTube video came out, and it was really a wild video. When you watch this all happen, you would ask yourself, well, what's the worst thing that could happen now? And probably a spread of information that wasn't accurate and that could eventually or potentially be misleading is one of the worst things that can happen. Because we can start to take action that's uninformed because something went viral and it had the social proof without the actual medical and scientific information that we need to make informed decisions. So we connected on that, and I said, I just would love to get Jessica on the IG and have you share with us what we might want to know about breathing for everyday life, right now, and going forward.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I know that video kind of got me not riled up, but it was best of intentions, right? Best of intentions, but I think the biggest issue about some of the information going around out there were things like, hey, if you can't hold your breath for 10 seconds, then you probably have COVID, you better get tested. And it's like, well, so many people can't hold their breath for 10 seconds, and it's for different reasons.
Yes,
so,
yes,
I mean, that's really going to stoke fear and anxiety. But I think,
right.
One of the biggest things about misinformation, especially when it comes to a novel virus like this, where we don't have any guidelines, we don't have any evidence yet of anything. We're still in the information collecting stage. So to go out and say, hey, you should do this, is a little bit troublesome because we don't have any standards in place yet. So we can say, and you say it and I say it, we give general breathing advice for the most part for healthy individuals. Yes, we touch on anxiety and things like that, but and I can say, hey, if you have asthma, we know that if you do this, it's okay to do because we have enough evidence behind it. Or if it was diabetes, right? We can kind of give some general health and diet advice because there's been enough evidence. And with this, there's no evidence yet. We're just collecting information. We're like, there's some guidelines that are being written on the fly and are changing on the fly based on what people are finding. And so that's where some of that misinformation is a little bit dangerous. Not necessarily dangerous, but certainly that video that we talked about could make people feel a lot worse instead of better. And you got to have someone in your corner that can check that for you.
100%. And that's why I think that, again, as an opportunity to say, how many people do you think have actually connected with a respiration, someone, an expert in respiration physiology at any point in their life? They may never have had the conversation, and had the opportunity to really look at how our systems work and what we do know about them. So when we can do things like this, your time is so valuable and appreciated. Because I know people are going to learn from this conversation and they're going to share that with their families and their communities.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part is now that there's a crisis is that there's not a lot of respiratory individuals available freely to speak with.
That's such a big deal.
They're putting out fires. So that becomes a difficult, we say, hey, don't listen to the advice that's just randomly floating around the internet. And they say, oh, well, I have no one to talk to. So
that's really hard. And one thing we always say on that is that hopefully a skill that we can hopefully gain together as a public is the ability to parse data and say what is nonsense, what is what is solid, right? What is more likely than not to be a truism with no downside that I might practice anyway in my community to take the extra safety step? And how can I, if I don't have a professional, how can I look at data and say, how do I make sense of that world? How do I know that this is solid information and it's a precautionary, method with no downside, or this might be shady information, or this is a YouTube video or a BuzzFeed article, and I definitely should not share it as public health advice. Like, how can the public get better about making those decisions if they can't talk to somebody like you?
That's so hard because even as a health professional, I struggle getting through the science. Right?
Yes.
It's not an easy task to interpret data. That's like a whole. We could spend a day talking about that.
Oh my gosh, right? But if you think about, let's take something really simple as we start the conversation. We'll talk about breathing through our nose. Yeah. I mean, you have something that is, is just a common hygiene practice. And I think one thing I do hope that comes out of this is that we begin to talk about breath hygiene. I haven't heard that terminology a lot, but we think about physical hygiene, we think about dental hygiene. What is basic respiratory hygiene? Not related to COVID-19, just things that are important in our everyday before this ever happened, that most people may not even know.
Because I'm a geek.
Oh, wow. This just got lit. This is awesome, Jessica. I love it.
I don't know if you can see it very well.
100%.
This is what I did. So that people can understand.
Oh, I love it.
Somewhat what the respiratory system is like. Because I think that's really important, right? So I'm going to just kind of give you a really brief explanation about more the defense mechanisms that we have in place already.
Wonderful.
Right?
Thank you.
And the reason why that's so important is because our lungs, our respiratory system, comprises kind of the largest epithelial area exposed to the outdoor environment. When we unpack all of the alveoli, it's as big as a tennis court. So that's exposed to everything that we're exposed to, right? So the good stuff in the air and the bad stuff in the air. And there is lots of bad stuff in the air. So obviously we can breathe through our nose or our mouth. And our first kind of line, I'm trying to get it in there, our first mechanism of defense is in the nose and the sinuses, where we've got, where we've got hairs, we've got turbinates, we've got the production of nitric oxide. So nitric oxide sterilizes the air before it makes its way down. The hairs and turbinates in our nose are going to block out any of the larger particles. So they're not going to block out a virus particle, but certainly our dusts and whatever else could be floating around, so the kind of the larger particles. So that's really key. And again, the nitric oxide, the cells in the nose and sinuses produce it at a way higher than safe. Like if you walked into a room with that much nitric oxide, you kind of die. But in our nasal cavities and sinuses, it's a good thing. And it sterilizes the air, right? Now, it's not going to kill all our viruses, but it's certainly going to be better than if we inhale through the mouth and it goes directly down into the lungs. Now, thankfully, there's still mechanisms down in the lungs, right? So we come through the airways, the blue's the airways, and the red little circles there are alveoli, so really where the gas exchange occurs and the air goes from the lungs into the bloodstream. And at that kind of cellular level, we have the epithelial cells. And on top of there, we have the cilia. So they're little like hair or finger-like projections. And then we've got a layer of mucus. So we have mucus already in our lungs. That's normal. And the job of that mucus is to trap pathogens, so things that are bad for us. And then these little hairs are going to beat at about 1,000 times a minute and move this cilia, or move this mucus, up the respiratory tract, where we're going to swallow it or cough it out. Okay, so we would do that. So that's kind of our basic defense mechanism for the respiratory system. And again, really basic, because down here, there's a whole bunch of cells that go on that are part of our immune system to try to recognize and attack the bad guys. Okay, so what happens in COVID, unfortunately, is that when the virus comes in, because we have no antibodies for it, it gets free reign of our bodies. And it's actually triggering cells to produce more cells like it, and it overwhelms it. And so this mucus layer gets thicker and thicker and thicker in a way to try to battle it, and then it just becomes too much. The whole system becomes overwhelmed. So that's it kind of in a nutshell.
That's an incredible demonstration, and something that, I would imagine very few people can even conceptualize, because I think that we have, I don't know why it is, but I feel like we have a society that we almost feel like we're made of fluff, like we're teddy bears or something. Like we don't have all of these internal, like we don't do, I don't think, a great job of visualizing our internal processes. And then you even get into like muscle and bone, then we get into the respiratory system. It's like, wow, that can't all be in me. It's almost as if it's another world apart. And then we've, I think, maybe become detached from it because we can't see it, you know?
Yeah, we understand how cars work better than our own bodies.
It's really, really true, right? And I wonder, I'm even curious of what technologies may come up that allow us to, I feel like we do a poor job of understanding what we can't see. So I can look at a respiration, I can look at a textbook, or I can look at a killer diagram like you just did, and I can say, well, that's awesome, but is that inside of me? It's like, yeah, absolutely. And those gateways to the immune system, if we can close them early, one thing we talked about a lot, which we want to be so clear about, is when we're talking about nasal breathing and nitric oxide, at no point are we saying, listen, that's the gateway to COVID-19. It will annihilate the virus. What we're saying is it's better than not. And the investment is as simple as closing our lips. So where can we make low-cost investments with no downside, with amazing potential upside? And how can we make that common knowledge so that there's no debate as to what might be optimal in the situation as we figure out the complexity of it all?
Yeah. And definitely, I think we can say that there is a tendency, perhaps, to be a little less sick when we are breathing through our nose,
right?
Because we are factoring out those pathogens, right? And we're not just bringing that cold, dry, dirty air directly into the lungs. And basically, it's kind of, I'm going to use a hockey analogy here, because I have people that play hockey. It kind of be like only having a goalie on the ice and not the defenseman.
Right. That's wonderful. Well, I love that analogy. That's fantastic, right? I know that for my own health and the health of the people that I love, I just want every player on the field, every defensive player on the field, right? Because it's there's nothing foolproof, and there's a lot that we don't know, but there is some basics that we do know about having more defense mechanisms in place is better than having less, especially right now. So that's really, really fantastic analogy. I love that.
And when we go to the general advice then, right? So what's the general, for 98% of the people, nose breathing is going to be great. There's some severe lung disease people that it's not actually good for. And there's going to be people with severe nasal obstruction, which I'm going to say you got to get that fixed so you can breathe.
So that you can breathe, absolutely.
But for the most part, we say that you got to do this. And a lot of people don't do it because of habit. They don't know that they can breathe through their nose, or they just simply don't know that that's how you're supposed to breathe, right? And you know that so many people don't know that. And then because it feels different, because it feels weird, the nose has more resistance naturally than the mouth, then they just don't do it because it's harder.
Well, it's funny.
For that general advice, nose breathing is good.
It's so funny because if you could see our DMs, like our actual DMs, we put out we share your stuff, we put out a lot of stuff every single day. Somebody's like, I'm breathing through my nose and I love it. Like, it's the #1 testimonial. And that was our goal with this stuff, which is why we're so honored to have you on, is our goal is to say, look, what's the 80-20 Pareto principle stuff here? It's like, oh, just, close your mouth, breathe through your nose, like take control of your internal state that way. But as we start to look at the rabbit hole, which is respiration physiology, and you get into the biomechanics and you get deeper into the science, I think that one thing that is so important right now, all of us can do, is how do we build a bridge? Because I feel like there could be a common knowledge, like sort of base, an expert's position, somebody who spent their life studying the respiratory system. But I feel like the bridge between the two is so far at this point that when this first happened, people were writing us and they're saying, listen, like, I don't know why I should breathe through my nose. How would that be beneficial? I'm like, well, let's just look at the science of it. I mean, let's take some ideas around. We have a public that quickly embraced, and as they should, but quickly embraced masks. They understood now that putting a mask over your face would increase humidification and that it could protect passages. I don't think that conversation was present in the atmosphere early. And I think maybe the not to be overly critical of any body, like governing body, healthcare body, but when the information came out that we should wash our hands and wash our hands, I thought, of course we should wash our hands. We should wash our hands like nobody's business. We should wash our hands all day. But the other part of the do the five that was missing completely was how you protected the respiratory system. And it seemed to understand the explanation of something. So we'll cover your nose if you cough or sneeze. And I thought, well, where's the do the six? Where's the sixth thing that protects your nose and mouth from the person who sneezed? It's almost as if we understood one side of a transmission process. And I just wonder what we can learn from that experience so that we can have it be a common knowledge thing early if something like this should happen again. Or even as people right now are saying, what do? I still have to go to the food store. I still go to work. I still go out in the atmosphere.
Yeah. And, I think it's just typical human nature, right? We're not going to think about things until we have to.
It's hard that way. So somebody I was listening when this first started, I was listening to a phenomenal podcast by the director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research on the Joe Rogan podcast. And he was brilliant. And it was very, very early. But he was talking about that analogy. He's like, we wouldn't build a defense craft carrier the moment that we got attacked. We have a fleet, military fleet for homeland security. A boxer wouldn't take boxing lessons the day of the championship fight. And so I wonder how I am at this. You prepare, and then you have the infrastructure in place. And this is something I really haven't heard talked about. We talk a lot about the infrastructure that maybe wasn't in place. Could we have had more masks? Could we have had more? But to move any conversation away from could have, should have, would have, what's an infrastructure that you think we can begin to build now that may be useful in the future based on what we've learned? Are there any changes we might want to make on that level?
Oh gosh, I mean those are big world questions.
Right? Yeah, I have no answer either. I'm just curious as to what we can.
I think it comes back down to behavior change on the individual level, right? What are we talking about really? We're talking about the things that we know. Wash your hands, breathe through your nose,
right.
Get enough sleep, eat properly, get exercise. All of those things are simple, but hard to do.
Hard to do, absolutely.
Because it's behavior change if it's not something that's been ingrained in you, right? So if you haven't grown up with those principles, and I do think that that's a big thing, right? Is that if you haven't grown up with those kinds of principles, then they mean nothing to you, right? And there hasn't really been maybe consequences for not following those principles because there's always somebody there to fix you or do something to you or give you something, right?
Or something you can buy, right?
Right, that old joke of everybody lining up for the pill that's going to make you better and nobody lining up for the behavior change that's free with no side effects.
It's hard, yeah, so, it is hard. And I think, we also have, we also seem to believe in things that we can buy a little bit. I think a dangerous place to operate always is when the answer is too simple. Because when the answer is too simple, it can't be true, right? So it's like, what do you mean? If I just did A, B, and C, that could, but again, you look at the 80-20 principle. So often it's the small things they really do magnify, but I think we have a hard time believing if I just do A, B, or C, it certainly will not prevent me from getting a disease, but it can reduce my risk. And if I reduce my own risk, I've reduced the risk of others around me. And one thing I hope that there's a exceptional moment in time for right now is to ask if any of us are familiar with a knowledge set in a field. How do we become better storytellers? How do we use this opportunity when the whole world is kind of online to say, well, wait a minute, what would be a communicative bridge around two major things? Habit building, like how do we do it? So I remember when I first started coaching people, I gave them a laundry list of like habits. I was like, well, this should fix things. I just want you to do like these 16 different things, and then week after week, I was like, well, this is not working. There's something wrong with the model. And then it's like, wait a minute, what if the model, which is what we try to do with our work, is say, look, what if the model was to build a 60-second daily breathing practice? And it sounds too easy, but then life gets crazy and it's hard. And then what if we talked about how to build a habit? Like you'd have a cue, a routine, and a reward mechanism. And you started with 60 seconds of breathing. And then you said, now I have a framework to build an exercise habit or whatever habit. But I think this moment is just so, there's a wonderful opportunity in the fact that people are coming together to learn and teach each other. And I really hope that we can capitalize on that by having people leave with a stronger sense of how they work internally and to understand why it's important, because it's not just viral protection. I've never heard viral protection as a main stated goal. It's a goal now, but I've never known anybody who just said, I want the strongest immune system. It's like, well, we all want to achieve things in our lives. We have goals, we have dreams, we have things that we're working on, and we want to be able to do them from the healthiest state possible,
Yeah. It comes from self-awareness, right? And one of the things about breathing is that we do it all the time, so we don't have to think about it, but we should think about it. And it brings us a little bit more in tune with our bodies, right? Like what's going on every time I breathe, which is 20,000 plus times a day. Do I even have awareness of that simplest task, right? And so maybe that's what we start with. That's an easy low-hanging fruit is, okay, well, let's just start with this, and then maybe having that awareness leads to more behavior change, right? Oh, hey, now I'm feeling better. What else can I do? What else can I do? So yeah, I mean, a big thing with all of this when we're talking about virus protection, it's really just about keeping our vehicle in good running condition. And what are the things that we need to do with that?
Definitely.
It could run. Same thing with a car. Car's going to run until it breaks down. Our body's going to run until it breaks down. But there's things that you can do to keep it running a little longer and a little bit better, right?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you is specifically, you think about, our frames as somebody who maybe we don't have asthmatic symptoms or any existing condition. But you and I have talked a little bit about people who do have pre-existing conditions in this environment and climate, somebody with asthma, COPD. What are things that they maybe should know that haven't been addressed because it's not the whole population, right? And so you're looking for specific information.
So, certainly from that population, the biggest risk that they have right now is that they already have reactive airways, meaning they are hypersensitive. They're going to trigger to pathogens quicker. There's already an increased inflammatory response in these conditions, and then their baseline lung function is lower. So when you get something like COVID and it progresses into the respiratory system, and one of the reasons why they're getting to more severe is that, like, if you and I have 90 to 100% lung function and we get sick and it knocks out 30% of our lung function while we're sick, we're still sitting around at 70%. Someone with asthma is sitting at 70%. They get knocked out 30%. Now they're down to 40% lung function. That's a really big problem.
Really important
information. So, I mean, the big things for people right now that have lung diseases, they definitely need to be isolating. And they need to be staying the course. Don't change anything with your medication. Don't change anything that you're doing. Like, don't experiment right now. But I will say that I did a study with children with asthma, and I found that, like, a vast majority of them don't breathe very well. And I see that in my clinical practice. People with COPD and asthma come in, and they don't actually breathe very well. And the biggest thing that this is what I do with the health professionals that refer to me in the respiratory world is my thing is think outside the lung.
Yep.
Yes, when you have asthma, when you have COPD, there's a pathology going on within the lung that really is going to be addressed by medication use. That is plain and simple. But what else is going on? If you're breathing through your mouth and you're heaving on your chest and you're breathing really fast and you're not very active and you don't eat very well, like all of those factors outside of the lung influence that disease process. Usually, if you're not doing things very well, you're going to feel worse. You're going to need more medication. You're going to need more medical help. So it comes back to, like, what are the basic principles of normal breathing? Can we apply in this disease state to get it better under control? And that's a big part of my practice.
Which is absolutely wonderful, because I think we take some things. I mean, you look at the world of asthma, for example, as if there was nothing that someone suffering from asthma could do to reverse or at least to push back on asthmatic symptoms. And you look at a lot of the research, you're like, wow, there's a lot of things that we can do in our everyday life. And I meet so many people. We work with young people through our nonprofit organization and through our sport coaching who have severe asthma, they have severe exercise-induced anxiety, there are all these things that, a breathing exercise won't fix, but changing the way that you breathe completely can certainly transform. One thing we always say at the gym is like breathing isn't everything, but breathing impacts everything, right? It's not the 4-minute exercise. It's understanding how our bodies, from the skeleton to the, everything that makes us move and to live, this whole organism, how it works, is fueled by breath.
So the thing is that you're right. Breathing, it's not going to fix it. I'm not going to cure asthma.
Right.
I'm telling you to breathe a certain way. What I'm going to do is help you control your symptoms better. And really, that's what people are going to doctors for, is for their symptoms. I feel breathless. They're not going because they go, hey, I think my lung function has decreased.
They feel, right? They feel something that's causing them panic, anxiety.
It's a quality of life. It's a quality of life issue. It's a symptomatic issue. And here's some things that I can give you to have a little bit more control over your symptoms.
Sure.
Recognizing that we also have to follow your health, your asthma action plan or COPD action plan with medication use. But that's not the only thing. And I think one thing that's really interesting is certainly with asthma, is the asthma medications are really good. They are really good. And so they kind of dropped the whole outside the lung part because they were doing so well. But then people are realizing, well, yeah, we do have these people who have asthma and the medications are working. And when we look at it on paper, boy, their lung function's really good. The medications are working. Well, why are you still breathless?
Right, yeah.
And that's where this came in, right?
Totally.
It's what goes on in our brain and what goes on in how we anticipate things like emotions and past experience tie into breathing so much.
Absolutely.
And then that shapes how our expectations are and our symptom manifestation, right? So
totally.
I mean, yeah.
One thing that I heard about, not to stick on the video thing, but it touches on what you said. And one of our friends in the breath space, a brilliant coach by the name of Barbara, Tansy, you know her, right? She's doing amazing work. We talked a lot about when you talked about not changing things or trying out new, weird, wild experiments. And it's like, I could only imagine through the lens of I can imagine, I can try to firewalk a process. We always think, we talk to our athletes a lot about firewalking a process, like going deep into the emotion of the projected experience. So if you saw somebody in a jiu-jitsu match and they got put into a position and they lost, they're going to feel pain and they're going to feel hurt and they're going to feel emotional turmoil, but you might not learn the lesson from that. But if you can go into what that moment felt like, deeply into it, you can almost prepare for it a little bit mentally. So I feel like if we were to firewalk the process of finding out that you now have a sore throat and a dry cough and additional symptoms, and you met with a professional and you had COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, you were infected with it, or a loved one was, and you begin to go through that emotional journey and say, well, how would I feel and where would I be looking for solutions? And how might I feel if some piece of information told me, look, this is going to cure it? And you're raising emotional expectation on something that can't possibly cure it. And I feel like there's a predatory nature to that. So how do we make sure that almost seems more destructive than anything? How do we help people, navigate the myths and say, what's a truism that I can pull off of the crazy world of the internet that I can help to understand how somebody who is infected, I know this is not your area of specialty, but just as we talk about it.
The biggest thing is seeking out a health professional that knows you, or that can get to know you, that can do the follow-up with you, or seeking out the organizations that are out there that have to have evidence-based medicines.
I love that you said that.
Right? Like, so the lung associations that are all over the world.
Yes.
Any of those kinds of respiratory health associations. And again, we're talking respiratory health. This could be anywhere. Always go to the organizations that really they have to be, because they are supported by physician or the medical community, so that they kind of have they can't really be putting fluff out there. And again, that video we're talking about, he was a physician, so he's definitely meaning well.
Right,
but
exactly.
What's happened is he took it. Somebody told them that told them that told them.
Yes.
And by the time it got to him, it was kind of butchered, and it was like, well, I get what you're saying, and all of us physios were going. So you're trying to do the active cycle of breathing technique, but you've done it wrong. For one, and two, this isn't actually the appropriate place to use it. Maybe for some of the patients, but certainly not for all. So
And one of the things we were looking at is I'm like, what are we essentially saying? Because you might see this video and the association with it, which was really powerful social proof, was it was tied to a famous author that a lot of people have great admiration for, right? So you're gonna have people who are like, look, what I should do in the midst of a respiratory pandemic is huff and puff through my mouth as heavily as I can, potentially in public or in a hospital, and don't pass out afterwards. Because in the video it's hilarious because he's like, whoa, I got dizzy. It's like that's what happens when you begin to hyperventilate out of nowhere, and then practice fake coughing. And I'm thinking, this is insane. And I got sent that video by so many well-meaning people who were saying, look, have you seen this? I'm thinking, unfortunately, yes, I've seen it. 11,000 people have seen it. How many people do you think will say, well, look, you know what, again, even just on the social proof of understanding that the author used it, right? As soon as you look at some of this dense breathing research, and it can be hard for anybody to make it through. And then you hear that somebody you admire greatly is using a practice that saved their life. And you're like, well, let me just try this. And we're talking about, again, just heavy open mouth breathing, potentially in public spaces, with a technique that, as you pointed out, is ineffective. So there's a lot of challenges to navigate there. One thing I think of is when I was growing up, right? Our family didn't see a doctor. I didn't ever see a doctor. So if we met a doctor, ever, I think whatever they were a doctor in, by the way, right? It was like they were the undisputed expert in all things health and medicine. Like any doctor of any kind, we'd be like, wait a minute, what do we do about this? And what do we do about everything? And as you work more in the medical community, you're like, wait a minute, there's lots of doctors of different calibers and levels of thinking and fields of expertise. Are you a doctor in respiratory therapy? Like, what are you doing? Because I love that it was just kind of like doctor says. I'm like, well, doctor of what? Like, wait a minute. Because he learned it about 10 seconds prior. He's like, this woman just showed me this. I was like, wait a minute, this isn't okay. And then, I guess what's really funny too is you never know. I mean, I'm sure you put up a piece of content, and I'm going to say that you never know if it's going to go viral. So maybe he's sitting there going, wait a minute, I should have researched this. I didn't think it was going to go around the internet on like BuzzFeed. But in the same vein, when you name a video, potential life-saving technique for COVID, when I saw the title, I got upset. When I didn't see the technique, I thought, well, there is no potential life-saving breathing technique for this. So whatever is behind the closed door of this video is going to raise emotional expectation to be erroneous because it would have been published through some peer-reviewed research study, right? And I clicked the thing, I was like, wow, And then again, so we have people in our community sharing it left and right, and I'm thinking that's the last thing we want to do. So how do we have a better conversation? And it's through moments like this where we can share with experts like you in your field,
Yeah, and this is just the problem with having this novel virus, right?
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know if that is a life-saving technique because we don't know if that person actually has mucus buildup.
Right.
We don't know if you should be, and even our general advice saying, hey, we should nose breathe, we should diaphragm breathe, we should slow it down, we should do all that. We don't actually know if you should do that in COVID. So if you've actually acquired symptoms, I don't know, but then I would say, yes, this is what you should be doing because I have no idea. There's nothing out there for us to work on yet. In another 2 years, we will have a little bit more information and we have some guidelines. Now, keep in mind that something like asthma, the guidelines change all the time because research is always changing and getting better. We're finding new stuff. So those guidelines change all the time. So again, it just kind of comes down to that evidence-based. When we're dealing with specific diseases, you got to have that evidence behind it, right?
100%.
Again, general healthy population, we know things are good, but again, how often does that change? Coffee's great for you. Coffee's terrible for you. Drink wine. Don't drink wine. Have all the chocolate you want. Never touch it. Right? Like that's always changing, and that can be really hard for the public, which is I think also why the public has a tough time with science.
Oh, 100%. They're like, well, wait, that one thing wasn't right. It's like, well, no, but maybe it eliminated something that was definitely wrong. One of my favorite things I ever heard about, somebody said, science can never prove anything, but it can certainly disprove things. And through the process of disproving things and saying, well, that doesn't work, we work to get to an answer, and any of those answers, for all of their faults, are going to be better than, I guess. You know what I mean? I believe, in my opinion,
stop them trying to answer those questions, right? And that's what we don't want to do. I know it's confusing all the time, but you definitely don't want people to stop asking those questions
100%.
and finding out, and do we know more? Because we are always finding that we don't know what we don't know.
I love that quote. One of my friends uses that a lot. It's such a brilliant, because again, I think that when we think about becoming storytellers around breathing, I didn't know there's a million things I don't know now that when I know them, when I learn them, they'll seem evident. Like, you know what I mean? Hindsight's an interesting thing, right? You go, well, it's obvious now in hindsight, but I would have needed to know it early. And I didn't know any of the stuff around breath for most of my life as an athlete, even coaching people. And then I thought, how did I miss it? You know what I mean? It should have been, it should have been obvious, right? And it's because somebody took the time to tell through the art of story a story that I can listen to and I can understand related to my goals as a coach and as an athlete. And I think it's a really great time for that. What you mentioned a little bit on how, if somebody actually got COVID-19, how that might change their breathing in general. Imagine somebody was, again, they made it through, but we're going to be looking at the impacted respiratory system. What are things that people might want to do to rebuild lung function and just take care of their lungs in that instance?
So one of the things we don't know is that we don't know what the lung function is after COVID, and one of the reasons we don't know that is they can't test it, because testing lung function is an aerosol generating procedure, meaning when you breathe out, droplets go everywhere, and they're banning that kind of stuff right now because of they don't know how long you're infectious for after. So lung function things, it remains to be, we don't know yet, we can't test it yet.
Sure. But one thing, in case we do get knocked out by the power, because I've loved this conversation, I appreciate it so much, is, we talk about, again, the things we don't know for sure, but there are the things that we can kind of posit. We can say, well, going into this with stronger lungs would be better than not. Would you agree with that as a baseline?
Sorry, say again?
Just, the idea of going into this with stronger lungs rather than not would inevitably be a positive, right? We're not going to find out in the end that having a stronger respiratory system was a negative.
Anytime we're facing a disease,
you want to build.
The stronger you are, like the healthier you are going into it, the better.
And it's those are the principles, I think, if we extract, that the public can say, well, we don't know this, we don't know that. What can we know in times of uncertainty? Even if it's just that, it's knowing that our ability to strengthen our lungs would be better rather than worse, and it's something we can all do while we're under quarantine.
Yeah, and in terms of, so I'll just say, like, we can't really strengthen our lungs per se. We can be nicer to them, obviously. One of the things that I mentioned with this thing, the little cilia down here, if you smoke, you paralyze these, and sometimes you kill them. So now that mucus sits in your lungs, and builds up, you essentially become a little petri dish. So smokers, what we have seen with COVID, are in big trouble with this.
It's hard, that's really hard.
Really hard. So obviously, don't ingest anything into your lungs. Smoking, vaping, whatever, don't ingest anything. Breathe through your nose. Respiratory muscle strength.
That's what right?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what role that plays. We know certainly that if you're getting any kind of surgery, if you where you're intubated, with COVID, the severe and critical ones are being intubated. What that does is it weakens the diaphragm. So we're going to have problems afterwards. I'll skip back to what might happen afterwards.
Yeah, that's what I was really interested in. You brought that up.
Beforehand, if your diaphragm is weak going into it and you're not a really very good breather, and could that be a downfall? We don't know that yet, but we do know that for other things that it is a problem. Is not having that robust respiratory system, right? So whether it's your mouth breathing all the time and you're using your chest and neck to breathe all the time, if we're nose breathing and we got a good strong robust diaphragm and intercostal system, then you tend to have better outcomes than those that don't. And then before we got cut off, we were just talking about the things that could happen. Even in the non-hospitalized group, from being sick is of course anytime you're sick and hurt or anything like that, there's an increase in anxiety. And I would say now there's a tenfold increase in COVID because everyone is scared once they get it, right? Am I going to be one of the ones that has to go to the hospital and be intubated?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of fear with it. Once you've been, let's say, short of breath and coughing for a couple of weeks on end, that sometimes becomes the new pattern. So I see a lot of people with chronic cough, and their cough started because they got sick, and then they couldn't stop coughing.
What a great point.
And it's a habit, is what it is that they've got a hypersensitive nervous system in their throat, and so they're all constantly coughing and clearing their throat because they feel something, and it's just altered perceptions, really, is what it is.
Right.
And same with the shortness of breath, right? I see, so one of the things about COVID is that it causes pneumonia, and I do see clinically people after they've had pneumonia, and I always say to them, I say, listen, this is what happened. When you got sick, all your respiratory inputs, like all the information that your brain receives about breathing, got unplugged, crossed, and plugged back in again.
I love that story.
So you have, like, your brain doesn't know what's normal anymore. It doesn't remember what is a better way to breathe, or what's the normal way to breathe, or any. So it hasn't found that again. I mean, I saw a young girl. She was in her 20s. Come to me after pneumonia, and she was breathing at 44 breaths a minute.
Wow, right.
And she couldn't work. And it's like, well, that's probably why. And she didn't need to, but she didn't know how to not do that anymore.
It's an amazing thing. I mean, if you just took a baseline, if everyone's stuck in their house right now, and someone is breathing through their mouth and heavily and excessively, their state of just overall anxiety and stress and likelihood to be susceptible to panic or a panic attack or an elevated state of arousal all day long is just baseline higher. And it's like, at this point in the game, I feel like any tool that we can put in the toolbox, you know, if you had two people in a house, one of them was breathing through their mouth heavily and found themselves feeling more stressed, more susceptible to watching the news about this and having that send them into an even more elevated state. And someone else was at a different baseline because of how they were breathing. Heart rate was in a different place. Stress physiology was just in a different foundational place. It's like, that's one of those small but powerful tools that will prepare that person for their perception of the news story that tells you something really scary. Or a lot of the sensationalist news that is geared towards advertising and creating a lot of fear right now, you know? So I think that if we can give people those tools, and if they can leave understanding that the baseline things that they can do are breathe well. I mean, to the name of your business, right? Breathe well, and you know.
Like right now is the perfect time to work on this stuff. What else have you got to do?
Well, isn't that the fun part? That's the fun part. Like, yes.
Work on breathing.
100%. Like, you know, we have classes that we're doing online stuff on Zoom, and we're taking people through breathing exercises. We're talking about ribs. We're talking about different positions, and it's like, it's been such a cool opportunity because these are folks who, some of them are just such hard driving people that they always meant to get to the breath stuff. But they have an ultramarathon race, a CrossFit competition, 20 other things. And now they're like, all right, I'm exercised out and it's only 9 a.m. I'll come to the damn breath class. You know, so.
I mean, like, you don't have any other distractions right now. This is the perfect time. Like, for me, when I'm working with people, I'm trying to get them to change their breathing patterns while they're still working, while they're
Life's
still
1,000 miles an hour.
All this stuff going on, and it's like you make these incremental little tiny steps. It's like, hey, we got maybe a month to sit around. This is what you could practice, and when we come out of it, boom, you're ready to go.
That's where it's at. I mean, you know, one of the things I'll say before we wrap up the call is something that people can do probably right now. That's a pretty good universal for the advice that is universal. Is while you're home, be aware of how you're breathing. And if something changes in your day, meaning you go to Facebook, and unfortunately, instead of all of your friends sharing jokes, it's everybody sharing how many deaths have happened today. Notice if that impacts your breathing. Notice if it speeds it up. Notice if it becomes short. Notice if it changes. When you feel you're most relaxed with family and you're doing a puzzle at night or something, notice your breathing. Notice if it's different from when you felt differently. And then start to understand that it's a bidirectional mechanism. We can't always control the inputs. We can certainly control some and limit how much catastrophic news we expose ourselves to in one 24-hour period. But the more that we can build that introspective, sensitivity, we kind of learn. Every day becomes a learning experience where we learn about who we are.
And you know what I say to the people that I see with high anxiety, I say, listen, I can't really change what makes you anxious. That's not my specialty.
Totally.
That's not my role as a physio, but I can change your physical response to what makes you anxious. And if I can change your physical response, you'll probably feel a little bit better.
It's
a little bit more in control, right? And that's what it comes down to. Is we're kind of. I always say we're approaching anxiety from the back door.
100%. And and I think that this can be a conversation for a whole other time, which is whenever we present to young people through our nonprofit, or even with the work that we do with teams, professionally. We ask people, like we ask young people, we're like, hey, who here thinks that stress and anxiety are like big problems, right? Every hand goes up. I'm like, cool. Who here can define stress or anxiety? Every room goes silent. And it's like, we can't attack this conceptual abstract dragon. What's happening in the body? What's happening in the brain? What do we know about it? What don't we know about it? What can we learn about it? What can we do about it? And then we can start to actually have a conversation about putting tools in a toolbox together. Jessica, where can people find out more about what you're up to? I mean, tell them where to go.
My website has lots of info.
It has lots of good stuff.
It's just breathewellphysio.com. And I've uploaded lots of information, a couple of videos on there, things like that. And of course, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. And you can just reach out, send a note, and
Well, I love everything that you're doing. I am so super grateful for your time and expertise, especially at this critical moment. I can't thank you enough.
Likewise, I love that you are on the breath bandwagon and shouting it from the rooftops. So I think that's fantastic.
Be well, my friend, and thank you so much for your time and for sharing.
It was great chatting with you.
I'll talk to you soon.